So we have Tuesday, September 16. Mild, small technical glitch. Why we have that 2 weeks in a row, I don't know. But I'd rather fix them than try to figure them out. Not smart enough to do both. Here's a woman who says, my former husband, whom I'll call Fred. Actually, she calls him Fred too. I guess that's catching on. Either that or there are a lot of people named Fred. My former husband and I get along pretty well these days. It really helps that I have no expectations or agenda about things that were huge issues while we were married. Alcoholism, smoking, suspected womanizing, that's a lot of things. Thank heavens for real love. Anyway, he and my son have had no relationship since the separation occurred. We were separated in 2002 and divorced in 2006. Fred is also not my son's biological father, although he raised him since age 7, and my son is now age 41. They actually got along pretty well, and have been until, she said, until the separation in 2002 and the divorce in 2006. My son blames the split up and subsequent divorce on the drinking and says he doesn't want his children exposed to it. He's the father, he says, and he makes the rules. I can see that he's attacking, running, and also acting like a self-righteous victim, and it's also none of my business. Bless your heart. Did you see that? I've told my son on more than one occasion that I was certainly not blameless in the divorce, but Fred is a handy target, and my son has to blame someone. I also understand that he doesn't feel loved, probably by either of us. Fred, that's the ex-husband, sent me a letter that he wants to send to my son, which is attached at the bottom of this, and is asking for my thoughts. It's a disaster, and I doubt that it will produce the results he wants. Fred is also acting like a victim. He's clinging and lying because he's trying to manipulate my son into feeling sorry for him. Yikes. Since Fred has asked for an opinion of the letter, because he wants me to read the letter before I send it to the son, does that make it my business? And the answer to your question is, yeah, it does. So, if your ex-husband sends you a letter and says, what do you think before I send it to our son? And, since he raised the boy from the time he was a little kid, it really is his son, even though it's not his biological son. Does that make it your business? Yeah, he's asked you for your opinion. And then you continue. It matters to me in that I'd hate to see Fred do more damage to their relationship. And yes, I can speak with real love. It sounds like you're fairly unattached to it, since you can say it's none of your business, which is a great place to be. I just don't know if Fred will be able to hear the truth or see what he's really doing. Well, whether he hears or sees the truth is one thing, but he's asked you for the truth, and so, you're at least entitled to speak it if you wish to. In a separate email, for those of you who are listening, I asked the writer, how much have you talked with Robbie, who is the son, to explain Fred's behaviors, to try to, expand Robbie's understanding and compassion? And she answered and said, anytime I've brought it up, Robbie becomes very agitated and angry, and I back away. He sees it as a choice that Fred is making. She said it as a choice. And so I asked some more. What do you mean it? I asked whether, he has continued to drink or not. And she said, yes, he's, presently drinking. And then she continued and said, I was a huge victim for quite a while, especially when Fred became involved with another woman early after we separated, which didn't endear him to Robbie either. I stopped feeling blameless when I read the Real Love book and listened to the, anyway, when I learned more about real love. And then she includes the letter from the father, her ex-husband, which says, Robbie, I'm truly sorry for the way I treated you when you were growing up. I'm sorry for being mean to you, belittling you, and embarrassing you. I don't blame you for wanting to distance yourself from me. If someone had done to me the thing I did to you, I would want to hurt them. I was wrong, and now I have to live with that. So, so far he's kind of telling the truth. I'm proud of you for rising above the adversity that I created. I know you're a great husband, father, and provider for your family. I don't expect you to forgive me, but if there's anything I can ever do for you, just ask. Sincerely, Fred. Not a bad shot at telling the truth. When he says, I don't expect you to forgive me, he's probably not telling the truth. It's probably exactly what he's writing for, is to get the kid to forgive him. And his truth-telling is incomplete because, he's saying, I'm sorry for the way I treated you, which really doesn't mean very much to the kid because, the kid really wants to hear kind of more specific examples of truth-telling, although he's really doing a pretty good job here, belittling and embarrassing you. I don't blame you for wanting to distance yourself from me, but, he really kind of does blame him, or he wouldn't be, bothered by the fact that the kid is distancing himself. And he's not addressing the fact that he's presently drinking now. So, it's not a terrible example of truth-telling. You know enough about real love to help him be a little bit clearer about telling the truth, giving more examples about some of the things that he did, in the past, talking about the fact that, for example, his drinking and other behaviors very likely led to the end of your marriage, which is something that really bothers the son. He didn't address that here at all. The fact that he's still drinking, he needs to address that here. He needs to so he needs to address a couple of those things, but before he brings this up by email or in a letter, it would be really useful if you could talk to your son more about why your ex-husband behaved the way that he did and why he's behaving the way that he is now, and kind of, I guess, prepare the ground for your son to receive this letter. If he just gets this letter, he's going to read it and just kind of, turn up his nose at it and throw it in the trash. So, anything you could do to talk to your son more about the principles of why people behave the way they do, help him understand your ex-husband's behavior, it'd be more productive. And you just do it kind of bit by bit. Describe your own behavior. Describe how you were a jerk in your marriage. Just casually, you don't need to make a great big deal of it, but say, and as you're, for example, just casually talking about people's behavior. Gosh, there are opportunities to talk about people's behavior all the time. As you're watching television, and you watch somebody behaving like an idiot, and you say, I did that. I did that a lot with your stepfather. You say, I did this and this and this. And you say, and he did too. And it's understandable that he would. He was empty and afraid. He grew up in this environment. It's understandable that he would react to his emptiness and fear by behaving in these ways. The more you can help him see and understand Fred's behavior, the more likely he is that he will accept him. Now, this might take time, but so what? And then you call your ex-husband, Fred, and you share with him the building understanding that's happening with Robbie, with your son. It may take a while, but you got a while. It's worth building understanding and acceptance. Gradually, bit by bit. But you've got the wherewithal to do it, and you've got the time, and so you build it with him, you share it with the ex-husband. It's really kind of fun to do. And bit by bit, those two will acquire a relationship, even if it's kind of like through you. Here's somebody who writes, today I told my CEO that I'm a social retard and that I'm insecure. It's hard to describe how great that felt. Now, that may sound like a funny thing to say. This isn't something that you would schedule for a special meeting. You wouldn't set up with your boss a meeting and then walk in and say, I'd like to tell you that I'm a social retard. But you would, for example, might be having a conversation with your boss about whatever, a skill set. You might be talking about your skills in computers, and then be talking about social skills, and might mention, my social skills compared to my computer skills are considerably inferior. In fact, socially speaking, I'm fairly retarded. I've never been entirely comfortable around people like I am around figures, for example. I've always been insecure about my worth, and I'm working on that. It explains a lot of my interactions with you, for example. And then you would describe a couple of examples of where he might be puzzled about your behavior toward him. And then something that would have puzzled him in the past suddenly makes sense because you're explaining that your social ineptness is the reason for it, rather than something he did or some specific problem that the two of you have. It's really helpful to people when they gain a better understanding of who we are. As we tell the truth about ourselves, it gives people an opportunity to what this guy's doing here, to see us, to then unconditionally accept us, and then gradually actually come to love us. And like he said here, it's hard to describe how great that felt. It's freeing to tell the truth about ourselves, even at work. It's really just a wonderful sensation. Here's a man that sent an email. I actually got to talk to him on the phone today. Delightful experience. Whose name is Fred. He says, I was in a tumultuous 4.5-year relationship with a wonderful woman that ended 1 year ago. For the first 2 years of our relationship, I continued a behavior that had been prevalent on my part with previous women. I would be enraptured for periods of time, but ultimately engaged in trysts. I love that word. It's very poetic, but most people don't use it. So for most of you, affairs outside what was supposed to be a monogamous, intimate relationship. In the fall of 2005, after I was busted yet again, I was finally motivated to go to therapy and made a commitment to change my conduct forever. People really have a hard time understanding unfaithfulness. When our partners are unfaithful, we tend to make it out to be a terrible crime committed against us personally. And so we then make our partners feel terrible, and we make ourselves out to be pitiful victims. And that's a terrible mistake that we make. When we make infidelity to somehow, we make it out to be much worse than all other crimes on the planet, when it's really all about real love. Our partners are unfaithful, not to us, just as drowning people don't drown to us. Our partners are unfaithful because they're empty and alone and afraid, and in reaction to those feelings, in order to fill their emptiness, they go out and attempt to fill themselves up with imitation love from simply a new source. And so they go out and they use somebody else as a new source of praise, power, pleasure, safety in whatever combination is familiar to them. And so rather than make them out to be monsters, they're actually pitiable and empty and afraid. So he continues. We got back together in the spring of 2006 until May 2007, when I ended our engagement to be married in August 2007. As I told her, it was the most difficult decision I'd ever made, but I just knew that our relationship wasn't right. I sensed that she had never really forgiven me for my past misconduct, so we couldn't move on to an incredible intimate togetherness. She was so fearful that I was going to engage in my past behavior again. She was always finding fault with me. So it sounds like it's very likely that as a result of your past indiscretions, she was playing the victim. She was making you pay for the supposed crimes you had committed against her, which is a lousy way to do a relationship. And we'll talk here in a moment about how, even though she was playing the victim about that, it could not have been just about that. could not have been just because of the past indiscretions. He continues, after I made the commitment to be committed and monogamous, I was beyond reproach, but it was never understood or appreciated. So, delightful, that you were committed to be monogamous and that you kept that commitment. But you failed to address the lack of real love, not only in you, but in her. So it would be inevitable that the problems in your relationship would continue and that your relationship would be virtually guaranteed to fail. And in fact, without the infidelities in your relationship, it's virtually a lock that your relationship could not have succeeded. And as I talked to this man on the phone, it turns out that this lady had been in multiple failed relationships before she'd been in a relationship with him. When people come to me and they say, there was an infidelity and our relationship failed and it's all because of the infidelity, there's no way in the world it was only because of the infidelity. It's because of the lack of real love that led to the infidelity. It's the real love that's the problem. It's not the unfaithfulness. He continues, I didn't know about unconditional love then, but I would tell her that you can't turn your love on and off like a spigot, which is something that he's going to explain here in a second, something she was doing. There was a constantly repeated pattern. She would get angry and disappointed with me for something that seemed small then, then not talk to me for a couple of days until I begged my way back by telling her how much I loved her and needed her. See, and he described to me some of the things that he would make little mistakes. She would demand that he do this little thing or that little thing, or she would be disappointed because he failed to do this tiny little thing. It's all a dance of imitation love. It turns out that she has these huge expectations that he serve her needs in just the exact right ways. And if she doesn't serve his needs for praise, particularly it sounds like in her case, for praise and power just right, also some for pleasure and safety, but mostly praise and power, if she didn't serve his needs just so, then she'd become furious. The infidelity, turns out, served as just an excuse, something for her to focus on, especially so that she could blame him. I just knew, he said, that being in a relationship that was great 80% of the time and dysfunctional the other 20% of the time was not acceptable and good for you. I mean, it's almost like hallelujah for the infidelity to point out the fact that the relationship was dysfunctional, because eventually it would have failed. It's almost better that it failed early instead of you marrying her and then 3 years into the marriage, when there's more invested, when you're more intertwined, when you're deeper into the relationship, then discover that there's no way in the world it could have succeeded. Most people are content with a relationship that's just like okay, and okay is just awful. Almost better that there's some tragedy that highlights the fact that a relationship is unacceptable. He continues, my responsibility was responding to her fear that I was going to sleep with another woman by making it about me or telling her she needed to get over that. Now, I realized that my response should have been more loving and caring, that she was crying out for help and moving forward. My issue is trying to help her understand that I've continued to grow and she needs to forgive, but she's so afraid of being hurt again. I sense in our limited communication that she still believes in us. Well, maybe. But she still lacks the one tool, real love, that will make a relationship work. That's the problem. Until she has some awareness of real love, until she at least has the willingness to accept it, that'd be the first step before she even has a commitment to learn to give it. She at least has to have a willingness to accept it. Until she starts on that path, nothing's going to work. Since we separated in May 2007, I've embarked on a path of personal growth and have not read a better book than Real Love. Well, how fun. And feel that it has definitely changed my life. Susie, we'll call her Susie, lives a half a mile from my house. She's cordial but doesn't care to sit down and talk about our relationship and consistently states that she has moved on. I don't believe that's the case. I know she's successful and very proud. Her entire family and all her friends are reminding her of my past conduct with a message of stay away from him, don't go there, you'll only get hurt. So not only is she a victim, but she's surrounded by victims who are going to confirm her victim state. And it's understandable. She's afraid of being hurt. But, fear just keeps us stuck. I gave her a copy of Real Love last Christmas and would like for her to see the videos on the website. My dilemma is how do I suggest that she explore your website without seeming holier than thou, or suggesting that you have a problem, or suggesting that she's responsible for our breakup. If I could sit down with her, I'd like to take responsibility for not providing her this love and support that she needed to forgive my past conduct. So you might ask her to meet with you and say to her, I would just like to clear the air about my mistakes, and say, I have no need to convince you of anything, nor am I going to ask you to do anything. I would just like to clear the air about some of the mistakes that I made in our relationship. It's pretty rare that people don't just love to hear an opportunity about how you are wrong. People love to hear the words, I am wrong, from somebody else, so that she doesn't feel any pressure. Then you talk about what you did wrong. You talk about the infidelity. You talk about the failure to listen to her fears about the infidelity. You talk about how you were judgmental, critical, impatient, whatever. You know what your own getting and protecting behaviors are. Go through the Real Love book and look for more of your getting and protecting behaviors. You'll find them. Then talk to her about what you've been learning about relationships, about what unconditional love looks like. And then say something like, I've learned so much about what loving unconditionally looks like and about what the lack of expectation looks like, that it's just completely changed the way I see myself, about the way I see other people, about the way I see relationships. And I believe that I can function completely differently in a relationship now. And I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not expecting you to do anything. But I believe that if we had an opportunity to interact in a relationship again, I believe that it would be really different. I believe it would be fun. And there'd be very little to lose. It would be an opportunity for you to see what unconditional love looked like. It would be an opportunity for me to practice unconditionally loving you. What would you like to do? So notice you're not asking her to do anything. You're not expecting her to do anything. You're just saying, what would you like? See how utterly devoid of expectations that is? Isn't that cool? What would you like to do? That's what you're saying. You're saying, here I've changed. Here are my mistakes. What would you like? What a hoot. How freeing that would be for her. But notice, you're not begging her to do anything. In fact, you need to go into this not wanting her to do anything. Because it may turn out that you've gone far enough down the road toward unconditional love, toward being free of expectations, toward being a real loving kind of person. And it may be that she is so not interested in being that kind of person that she may be absolutely on a different path in life. It may be that she is utterly incapable now of being your partner. So that if she says, well, I'm not interested in that, you have to be willing to just let that go like a husk, like an outer shell, like the distant past. If she is interested, then you would explore it as, kind of like an experiment. Really. Like, well, all right, well, let's see. Let's spend a little time together, during which you will experiment with loving her. And you will see how she responds to that as an experiment. Not to convince her of anything, not to get her to do anything, not to get her to be loving in response, not to get her to accept it, nothing. Just to observe and see what she does in response. But boy, if she doesn't respond to your unconditional love, and if she doesn't respond to your offer, move on, and move on quickly. Real love is too precious to be shoving down anybody's throat. Here's somebody who says, I just spent the weekend at a wedding with family who aren't loving. I explained to my sister that she doesn't have the right to be angry. That's correct, isn't it? No. But you're close. If you say you don't have the right to be angry to an angry person, I can bet on what they would do in response. They would demonstrate the right to be angry. Everybody has the right to make their own choice. That's the law of choice. And one of the choices that we get to make, this will be easy to remember. The most important law in the universe is the law of choice, which is that everybody has the right to make their own choices about what they think, say, and do. Everybody. Always. And one of the choices that we get to make is to be angry. So, you always have the right to be angry. But, since anger always makes us unhappy, why would you want to make that choice? That's the point. You always have the right to be angry, but the part that you were trying to remember is anger is always selfish, it's always unloving, it's always unkind, it's always harmful, it's always unhappy, it's therefore always wrong and damaging. Those are the things that it always is. So, yeah, you have a right to do it. And then people come back with things like, well, sometimes people say to me, well, I have a right to be angry. And one of my favorite responses is, you have a right to stick your head in a toilet, too. You have a right to run out and play baseball in the middle of the interstate. But why would you want to do stupid things? Because you have a right to be angry, but anger is stupid. It's unproductive. So why do it? Or people will say, anger is natural. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are natural. Snake venom is natural. Hurricanes and tornadoes are natural, but look how destructive they are. So the old excuse of it's natural is a foolish defense. But do they have the right? Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, really, and see how it works for you. Last week, somebody sent in this question, and I didn't get to it, so definitely going to get to it this week. What is the difference between people pleasers, or people pleasing, and real love? Parenthesis, real love is about the happiness of others, but a pleaser is always thinking of others' happiness as well, thinking of others' happiness as well. They live for the happiness of others. There appears to be a fine line between the two. How do we know when we're being a people pleaser versus being unconditionally loving? They could, from the outside, look similar. People pleasers look like they're caring about the happiness of others. They, after all, do things for others. But it's really all an illusion. It's all a trick. And the difference between people pleasers and people who are unconditionally loving is not a fine line. It's all about motivation. And the difference is Grand Canyon big. So, with real love, So you could have a people pleaser, for example, who would, let's take two people. And you could have one person, the people pleaser, take over a hot meal to a neighbor. You could have somebody who was a real lover, an unconditionally loving person, take over a hot meal to the neighbor. And to the untrained eye, they could both look like identical actions. In fact, physically speaking, they could be identical. Both of them bake the casserole, go out the front door, down the steps, over to the neighbor, deliver the casserole. It could look like identical behaviors externally. But the motivation is huge. And what happens afterward is enormously different between the two. So with real love, there's no desire for something in return. Even though with real love, you always do get something in return. What you always get is joy. But that's just a natural consequence of being loving. You don't go and do something for somebody so that you will get something from them. The joy you get is an intrinsic reward. It's an intrinsic divine reward that you get for being loving. It's not something that you get in return from the person you serve. This is huge. People pleasers, on the other hand, want something in return from the people they serve and from the other people around them. They want gratitude, they want acceptance, praise, they want a sense of self-worth, and they also want a lack of things, like they want a lack of criticism from the people around them. And if they get those things, you often cannot spot a people pleaser. So, for example, if the people pleaser takes over the casserole to the people next door, and the people next door say, "Oh, thank you so much. Why, you are just the most wonderful person we have ever known. We cannot thank you enough. Why, they go on and on." Well, then the people pleaser comes back and they're just all aglow and just smiling from ear to ear, and you can't tell a people pleaser from an unconditionally loving person because they're very happy. So you may not be able to spot a people pleaser at that moment, although a trained eye could, because people pleasers beam in a really sneaky way. They beam in response to gratitude, whereas unconditionally loving people don't. They glow from within. Whereas people pleasers kind of dance and squirm and kind of look around to make sure that the people around them are praising sufficiently. Unconditionally loving people don't look around for gratitude and praise. You can spot them. But it could look the same. But if people pleasers don't get what they're looking for, the gratitude, the praise, the power, the control, the whatever it is that they're looking for, they become, and here are the things that will help you spot a people pleaser every time. They become disappointed. They become irritated. They become discouraged. In real love, now, sometimes you may be sad. For example, if someone is unhappy. If someone that you are loving is miserable, you may be sad for them, but you're not sad for you. And if you love somebody and they don't reward you, you never become irritated at them. That's an absolute giveaway, and it is not a fine line. Here's somebody who says, my ex-sister-in-law calls when she's obviously drunk. It seems like a waste of time to talk to her, but very often I do. It's not loving. Listening to someone when I really don't want to is not kind. That's really true. For one thing, it leaks out all over you when you're listening to somebody you really don't want to. You don't feel loving. I just can't figure out what to say to hang up. Or should I just hang up the minute I realize that she's toasted? Oh, this is really easy. You actually want the words to say? This is easy. So having been in AA and NA for years and years, anybody who's been in a 12-step recovery program for very long at all understands that when somebody is under the influence of either drugs or alcohol, they're not there anyway. And so picture, if I'm drinking and I call you, you're really only talking to the bottle in my hand. So if you think you're being polite to talk to a bottle, then you are a moron. You're just stupid. So you're not being the least bit polite to talk to a bottle. None. I mean, because I'm really not on the phone with you. My bottle is. That's just dumb. And it's a waste of time for you to talk to a bottle or a fire hydrant. So you don't really need polite words, but if you want some, because sometimes the person on the other end might actually remember that you talked to them, so you just as well be a little bit polite. So you say, I have to go now. I have something important that I have to go do. That's all you have to remember to say. Now, and you say, well, I don't want to lie. Well, breathing's important. So what do you have to leave the phone and go do? You have to leave the phone and go breathe. You don't have to tell them what it is you have to go do. But let me tell you, other than talk to a drunk, pay attention to me here now. Watch. Everything in life is prioritized, right? So when you're prioritizing things, everything in life is more important than talking to a drunk. So is this hard for you? You're not lying. Everything on a priority list is more important than talking to a drunk. Sweeping cobwebs from your bathroom, you haven't done that in a long time, right? So think of that in the back of your head. I haven't swept cobwebs from the corners in my bathroom. I have something important to go do. If you need to remember that line in the back of your head to terminate the conversation with a drunk, do it. I have to go and stack neatly the matches or toothpicks in my pantry. You go do that, because everything is more important in priorities than talking to a drunk. Go do it. Because I've been there on both ends, talking to a drunk, and I've been the drunk. And so I'm not making fun of the drunk. I've been both ways. There's no sense continuing to talk. When, next writer says, when parents or relatives get old enough or otherwise disabled and have legitimate need of mental assistance, where they can't make some decisions for themselves, if we choose to help them, how does our role and approach change? How do we balance trying to interpret what they want with what we think is best? And it's really kind of a lot like working with a child. If you read the Real Love and Parenting book, you with children, you increasingly allow children to make decisions as they understand the consequences of their decisions. And parents really make a mistake with this. They're just awful at it. They keep making decisions long past the time when children understand the consequences. Long past. Now, as parents become older, you do the reverse. You increasingly make decisions for parents as they are no longer able to understand the consequences. You see? And again, we often make mistakes in the reverse. We continue to allow parents often to make decisions long past where they're not able to make decisions or understand the consequences, but often children jump in and they are too intrusive. They try to make decisions for their parents where the parents do understand the consequences. You simply try to understand if the parents understand the consequences. So I suggest kind of like this. When relatives become increasingly mentally disabled, first, begin to ask them whether they would like more suggestions from us about what to do. Often they will welcome suggestions. So first, ask them if they want the suggestions. Eventually, these people won't even have the ability to make an assessment about whether they even want the suggestions. So then, try simply offering the suggestions. And then observe whether they're capable of taking the suggestions, or observe whether they're accepted. Then, eventually, as they become increasingly disabled, simply make some decisions for them and see what happens. If you go too far occasionally, then you ask forgiveness when you go too far. It's really a dance of experimentation, because sometimes you simply will make mistakes. Often you can't determine whether you go too far until you've gone too far. That's how you learn. People ask me that all the time when I'm counseling with people, and they say, how do you know you've gone too far with making suggestions? I say, easy. You go too far. You make a mistake. And so that's how you figure it out. And then you apologize. You say, oh, my mistake. I thought I was helping, and I went farther than I meant to, or went farther than I should have gone, because it's obviously not farther than you meant to. You meant to go exactly that far. And I stepped on your toes, and I apologize for that. I didn't realize that that was something that you could take care of, so let me back up. And, you know, we learn by screwing up. My 23-year-old stepson is attempting to gather both sets of parents and his siblings together for a weekly dinner. Hiking, movies, and so on. Weekly. That's very takes a lot of energy. While we would love to spend this kind of time with our children, who are 16, 18, 21, and 23, it's very ambitious, we're not interested in spending this kind of time with the ex-husband and his spouse. We know that our son is sincere in his desires to feel loved and connected, and thus heal his wounds from the divorce by creating opportunities for both his parents to socialize with all the kids in one venue on a regular basis. What is the most loving way to tell our son that my wife has no interest in spending any of her free time in the company of an ex-husband? Oh, just like that. Why pussyfoot around? So describe to him what it is that instead of spending so much time telling what you don't want, tell him what you would like. So does she have no interest at all in spending any time in the company of the ex-husband? If that's the case, then fine, tell him that. Then say, so what I would like to do is I would really like to do this. And would he be willing to organize time, say spending time with this group of people and then organizing in another event with this group of people, so that maybe you could spend time with one set of kids and then another set with another set of parents, or describe what you'd like. But you may not be interested in the same kind of healing that he's interested in healing. Then ask him what he'd like and see what can be accomplished without requiring your wife to spend time with the ex-husband. Because there's a whole lot that could be done that would accomplish healing and loving without her having to spend time with somebody that she doesn't love or doesn't want to be with. So there's lots of loving that can happen. He could be absent from an event one time. She could be absent from an event another time. They could alternate attending these events. Something. Maybe this whole event could happen with the two of them alternating. But instead of coming up with, I'm not going to do this, or we're not interested in attending these events, talk about what you're willing to do. Maybe his organizing these events exactly like they are, but them alternating is I don't know. But be much more positive about what you're willing to do instead of saying no, no, no. The kids really got some energy here. This is very cool. So be open and positive and not so down on what you're not going to do. How cool that a kid's being willing to do that. My husband often displays passive-aggressive behavior, and I find it difficult to respond kindly, let alone not feel crazy to him when he's being manipulative, controlling, verbally abusive, and so on. How can I express real love to him during these situations? When your husband is being passive-aggressive, and that's kind of a vague term, but when he is manipulating you by being controlling, by being withdrawn, by being verbally abusive, by being unloving. It would have been helpful to know exactly what but you've given some examples. Controlling, no, it'd been more helpful if you can give me some real examples, but I'm getting a clue. But when he behaves in these unloving, angry ways, because certainly unloving and angry would describe probably all of them, you're going to be torn by a fear of not being loved by him. That's how he reaches out and hooks you. And you describe it as difficult to respond kindly. And that's because he's reaching out and poking you. That's how these people control us. We're afraid that these people won't love us. And so we do what they want so that they will love us. Or at least so that they won't not love us. So that they won't be angry at us. So that they won't withdraw their love. So that they won't whatever. So they won't do whatever we're afraid of. And you have got to be absolutely free of fear. You're afraid of him. So when he starts acting in these ways, you have to stop seeing him as a monster, because you presently do. You see him as manipulative and controlling, and you see him as being in control, and he's not. It's so much more helpful to see him. You pick your visual image. See him as drowning. You could see him as crippled. You could see him as a 4-year-old petulant child wearing diapers. And I don't mean that in as a demeaning, critical way, but I mean as a 4-year-old wearing diapers, sucking his thumb and waving his pacifier in the air. I mean it in a way so that you can create a visual image so that he's not threatening, because that's really what he is. I'm not making this up. He's empty and afraid, or he wouldn't be doing this. The only reason people are trying to control us is that they're afraid and they're empty and trying to get us to do something. If they were feeling loved and being loving, they wouldn't do this. So, you have to not need him to do anything. And when you get sufficient love from the people around you, you won't need him to love you. You won't need to protect yourself from him. You won't be afraid of not being loved by him. And then his controlling behaviors will look laughable. I mean, the tantrum of a 4-year-old, when you're not afraid of the 4-year-old, looks like a joke. Mothers come in to see me with their 4-year-olds who are having tantrums on the floor, and because the mother needs the love of the 4-year-old, the mother is going, oh, mothers do this to me all the time, oh, well, what am I going to do with the 4-year-old? And I burst into laughter at both of them, both the mother and the child, because they're being ridiculous. I say to the child, I'm sorry, I don't understand a word you're saying. Just like that, to the child. And then I speak softer and softer and I say, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I don't understand the words you are saying, I sometimes say to the child. And if I say that soft enough, invariably, eventually, the child looks at me and goes, what's wrong with you? And of course, then I look at the child and say, I don't understand you. And then the child speaks to me in English and tells me what he wants. And the mother's looking at me like, you're kidding, that's all it took? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I'm not afraid of the kid. So I don't need the child to love me. I'm not afraid of the child. And so I can just say to the child, you're going to have to speak to me in English if you want something. Whereas the mother is afraid of the child. The mother needs the child to love her, and so she sits there and has a little fit and is willing to give the child whatever he wants when he has a little tantrum. And so what do you think the child has every time the child wants something? A tantrum. And that's what your husband is doing. Your husband is having a little tantrum, and so why do you think he's manipulative with you all the time? Because he gets what he wants. Why do you think he's controlling? Because it works. Why do you think he's verbally abusive? Because it gets him something. We only repeat behaviors that have a reward. We do not repeat behaviors that don't get us something. We really don't. We're fairly simple. If there's a behavior that we repeat that has no reward at the end, whatever, we're not stupid. We don't keep that behavior up. We stop it. And so you have to stop rewarding that behavior. When he gets all angry and manipulative, you have to just sit there and just do absolutely nothing. You have to not get all emotionally wrapped up in it. You have to not respond to it, not just anything. And then understand you have no obligation to respond. That's the other thing. You have a fear. You have a need. You have a fear that you'll not be loved. You have a need to be loved. You feel an obligation to give him whatever he wants. That was the third thing I forgot to get to. You have to get rid of that feeling that loving him means that you're obligated to give him whatever he wants. And then understand, finally, the fourth thing, that what you need to do is your duty, your goal, is to love him only as well as you can do freely. So to do anything more than that will kill you. So love him only as well as you can give to him unconditionally. And when you get that through your head, your whole life will change. So when he has his little fits and he says, well, I want, then you tell him exactly what you're willing to give him in any given moment. You say, well, this is what I'm willing to do. And when he says, well, I want 3 times that, you say, I understand. I wish I were a better person. And here's what I can do. And he says, and I want this and this, I want 3 times more. You say, I know, I wish I were better. And here's what I can give you. And he says, and if only you were a better wife. Yeah, I know. I wish I were too. But you don't defend yourself. I was talking to a woman on the phone today, and she was telling me that her husband often criticizes her and attacks her and criticizes her family. And I said, so what? Why do you respond? You don't have to defend your family. You don't have to defend yourself. So when your husband says you're a terrible, you're right. You're absolutely right. And she says, well, but it hurts my feelings. Why? It would only hurt your feelings if you actually expected your husband to be loving. But he's not. So get that through your head. Your husband is a 4-year-old who is incapable of loving you. And once you get that, then none of his behaviors will be a surprise to you anymore. Will they? No. And now you're only obligated to love. So get it through your head that he can't love you any better than he can. and get it through your head that you can't love him any better than you're doing right now, but that you will make a commitment to try to love him a little bit better every day. But that won't be anywhere near as loving as he needs or demands. And so your goal is to be a little bit more unconditionally loving every day. And you can only be as loving as you can offer freely. And then lighten up on the rest. And you don't need to do guilt about it anymore. Pretty fun, huh? So today is September 16th. We're going to meet again on the 23rd. And we look forward to seeing you again in a week. Please send some more of your questions to greg@reallove.com. You sent a whole bunch of great ones this week. We look forward to seeing you again in a week. And in the meantime, remember that it's always about real love. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.